Welcome to Transform Now, the podcast brought to you by robotic process automation pioneer SS&C Blue Prism. Digital transformation has the potential to reshape the way companies service their customers, engage their employees, and manage their operations. Whether you're looking to develop strategies, tactics, or best practices to positively impact the future of work, or you're curious to see how other companies have successfully navigated their digital transformation programs, then this podcast is for you. We're here to help you transform now.
Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Michael Marchuk. Welcome to the Transform Now podcast. Thank you for joining us today for part 2 of the Going Green with Digital Workers podcast. If you missed part 1, you'll probably want to catch up on that first. To remind you, we've been chatting with Brad Hairston, Thomas Richter, and Drew Sonden from Blue Prism, along with Michael Heric from Bain and Company. Let's rejoin the conversation we started in part 1. Brad, the white paper mentions the role that third-party partners can play in augmenting Blue Prism's digital workers in order to drive environmental benefits. Why was it important to highlight the partner ecosystem in this white paper? And can you share an example of a partner solution that was referenced?
Yeah, at Blue Prism, we are partner-centric. Our partner ecosystem is critically important to us, and our partners are often the tip of the spear when it comes to developing specific solutions that address a need in the market. So an example here that we call out in the white paper is our technology alliance partner, Glint. That's G-L-Y-N-T. Now, they're an AI company that provides intelligent document processing capabilities, but they're much more than that, and they've become laser focused on sustainability. They looked ahead and they saw that this new guidance from the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, which regulates all public companies, they saw this guidance coming from them that will require all publicly traded company CFOs to provide much more detailed emissions reporting starting next year. So Glint developed a solution using their technology to extract and transform data from utility bills and other data sources and turn that into useful information that the company can use to satisfy the SEC requirements, as well as inform other stakeholders who care about how the company is progressing against their sustainability goals. And they team up with Blue Prism because, as we talked about earlier, it's one thing to have the insights. You need to put the insights into action. You need to get that useful information to the people that need it efficiently and quickly and accurately. And digital workers are the absolute best way to do that. So we have a great solution in tandem with Glint as a partner. And it's a really compelling solution to put in the paper because it's going to put a lot of CFOs at ease who are already worried about how they're going to fulfill the emissions reporting requirements that start next year.
I agree. Now, Drew, at Blue Prism, you advise a lot of companies in supply chain automation, and certainly the white paper highlights the supply chain as one of the big areas where intelligent automation can make a big difference in the sustainability realm. Can you expand on that for us?
The perennial problem in supply chain, and one that still exists despite businesses facing it for a number of years now, is fragmentation between supply chain functions. And I guess I spoke earlier about the power of intelligent automation to bring those individual areas close together so you have a more unified view of what's happening across your entire supply chain, rather than focusing purely on inbound logistics or warehouse management or manufacturing or customer experience. You can tie those things together to introduce efficiency. But even if we look at individual areas, there are still opportunities for bringing the ESG agenda to the fore. One of the examples that we have in the white paper is around the steel manufacturer Norskjold. And the example that we have there is how they improved their day-to-day production schedule. They do a lot of bespoke work for clients, and understanding how best to use both their shop floor machinery and also the available materials in order to produce what their customers required is something that intelligent automation supported. And from the very get-go, their agenda wasn't simply to make more money, to leverage better their machines, to deliver quicker for their customers, but it was also to make better use of the materials they had, to reduce the amount of waste steel it produced. So again, it comes back to that idea of, to be green, you don't simply have to laser focus on that to the exclusion of everything else. The same way as the energy deal that's just been signed off in the US, we can actually increase our revenue. We can actually make more money by following that green agenda. And if you move away from the shop floor and look at logistics, we talked earlier on about the importance of IoT. Michael, I think it was you that brought the subject up. If we can leverage the data that we have in both the machinery we have within our factories, but also within the vehicles we have in the logistics fleet, we can start to better understand how those pieces of equipment are performing. We can understand much quicker than we would be with manual inspections what's going wrong with them. And we can move away from effectively very wasteful prescriptive maintenance schedules to more intelligent demand-based schedules. If you take the example of a truck, for example, maybe the prescriptive maintenance schedule for that truck is that you replace the clutch every 6 months, because that's how often they tend to wear out. Well, if we're reading the IoT sensors attached to the gearbox and we identify that actually after 6 months' time, that clutch is still functioning pretty well, maybe we can wait till 9 months or 12 months to replace it. And again, we're not wasting materials that would have just gone into the scrap otherwise. Not only, again, is that business saving money on raw materials or parts, they're also ensuring that they're operating in a more ecologically responsible way. And if you then extend that example, I suppose, to look at perhaps something that we could try and do in the future, one of the biggest new ideas, perhaps from an ESG perspective, is this concept of the circular economy. Being able to track components, parts, items through their entire life cycle, from the point they were manufactured to the point at which they're recycled and then reused. And it's fairly easy with simple components to do that. If you're a manufacturer of bolts and you want to make sure that those bolts get recycled at the end of the day, well, that's fine. It's just a piece of metal. But if you're an automotive manufacturer and the vehicles that you're selling have hundreds, thousands of component parts, and because you want to satisfy your customers, each vehicle that goes out the door has a slightly different configuration, how do you keep a handle on that in terms of where that vehicle is within its life cycle? Particularly where your suppliers have different part codes and different part corollaries to what you do. Particularly when the dealerships also have a different method of tracking things. How would you reliably ensure that when that vehicle reaches the end of its life cycle, you know where it is, what's within it, and how to recycle it more effectively? Well, let's think about applying intelligent automation to that. Firstly, we can ensure that we have parity between the various different naming conventions. We can look into our supplier database. We can look into our manufacturer database. We can check the maintenance records for that vehicle so we know exactly what kits within it, how old each component part is, what sort of state it's in. Secondly, we know when that vehicle's changed hands. We can build up effectively a full life cycle picture of an individual car. We know exactly where it's been, what's happened to it, so that when it does finally get to the point where it needs to be end of life, we can say, right, well, actually, those components are only a couple of months old because it was repaired a lot in the last few months of its life cycle. So actually, we can immediately remove those and put them back into the secondhand market. We can say, right, we know that this particular vehicle's got an upgraded brake system, and that actually the brake pads are currently not recyclable because they're made of a different material. So we can immediately get rid of those, not to worry about what happens to them, and recycle that vehicle much more quickly, much more effectively. That's the point we want to get to, where we're using intelligence to track complex equipment and to support their effective reuse at end of life.
Absolutely. Now, as we're talking a lot about the broader supply chain, Michael, I wanted to ask you, how does Bain approach reviewing the supply chain at a particular client to really look if there's automation opportunities?
I think our first principle, obviously, is that the design of your supply chain is sort of at the center of your sustainability choices. And so, the goals that you set, you need to kind of work backwards in terms of how that's going to impact everything from the offerings through your supply chain. Obviously, as a strategy consulting firm, we're going to start really with our sustainability goals and the customers and sort of work backwards in terms of what that means in terms of the design of your supply chain. And that's really where we start, if that makes sense, Michael.
It sounds like you've designed it around the idea of sustainability as you're building out the supply chain or having to redesign the supply chain for that purpose. So it does make sense.
Absolutely. And I mean, automation is obviously a critical component of that. Just to give you an example, at the beginning of this year, obviously there was the World Economic Forum, and we did a study with about 400 different executives with the World Economic Forum to really understand how technology, including automation, is it having an impact basically in terms of achieving your sustainability goal. And I think about 40% of those key executives said that it's already having an impact in terms of achieving those goals. And obviously supply chain is part of that. And automation was really, if you kind of go down the different industries, whether it's retail, oil and gas, financial services, automation is always in sort of the top 10 list of a key enabler in terms of making those things happen. So if it's, for example, retail and reducing food waste as an example, automation plays a critical role, as does analytics, as part of doing that.
Thank you for expanding on that. So, Thomas, as we're discussing addressing all these changes within, for example, supply chain, you have to do that in some kind of orderly way. And so the paper briefly addresses the topic of governance. Why was that important to include in the paper?
Yes, it's definitely a critical issue. And it comes back to the latest statements from Michael for the supply chain. Governance and compliance will be a new challenge for traditional industry like manufacturing. And what we have learned from other industry like the life science business, when it becomes a high regulated industry, now this regulatory and compliance tsunami is going to hit all ESG affected companies as well. And who's forcing the industry to deliver all these climate and ESG targets? And it rightly became a public debate. State representatives all over the world, they meet at climate summits and agree to all of these climate goals. But they not only define the goals, they also set goals and new laws into place. And in the end, laws and regulations were created that must be implemented by the industry. And a good example is in the early 2018s, the European Commission adopted a new circular economy package, including a new set of measures, which includes strategies to increase the reuse and recycling of materials, to minimize waste impacts and implement a European-wide monitoring framework. And a framework where all these circular economy policies, with its links to climate policies, resource inflow, outflow data, waste, and emission data must be fully tracked and integrated. And the real challenge of managing such a, let's say, digital trace of any component over its entire life cycle is to generate a reliable set of data out of sometimes incomplete, untraceable, and unstructured data. Out of this ecosystem I talked before of manufacturers and service providers, and you can imagine the skill levels in digitalization could not be more different when you look at this ecosystem and the different players within. And to establish such a continuous, reliable, and I think it's almost highly autonomous data exchange within this network, it requires, again, this digital first approach. Before we think to start about how to design and operationalize such a network, the first thing is to consider what can be digitalized and automated as much as possible. And a good example is to utilize the digital twin concept as a technology model of any component data set over its life cycle. And here again, intelligent automation needs to become a core part of such a digital first approach. And governance also means there's another important field for ESG governance, let's say. It is how to manage and execute and to operationalize all these policies and the new upcoming regulatory work. This is additional work that has not been done before, particularly not in this industry. For example, it needs to have a full detection of any change requirements and new regulations which coming every day up, a quick assessment what business area, product, component, material, or service is affected by these changed requirements and in new regulatories. a fast implementation and operationalizing of the requirements within the entire organization, truly end to end. And at the end, to have to track and to secure the completeness of its full implementation, because everything needs to be documented and will run through an audit. So we need to have a compliance in terms of auditability. And this is all why we think digital first, enabled by intelligent process automation, becomes such an important success factor.
By the way, Michael, I think this goes back to what we started this talk about when I mentioned the research that we were doing, which is we've moved from setting ambitious goals to people want to see outcomes, and they want to have confidence that the outcomes have actually been achieved. And so they want to see frameworks on how companies are going to measure this and be held accountable for results. And I think it's been great setting ambitious goals, but now is the time to make sure you deliver on them. And I think automation will be important not only on delivering them, but also making sure you can get the data to actually measure the outcomes and to hold companies accountable.
Of course. And as Thomas mentioned, there's the critical nature of the data and data change. It seems like that'd be something that'd be very important for organizations to be able to extract. So for utility companies to be able to provide that kind of information, but also be able to pull it from other data sources like governmental databases or websites, so you can make these reports available and track the actions that you're taking. So, Brad, at the end of the white paper, the paper provides some advice to companies and how to elevate their focus on the environmental sustainability and really consider the role that intelligent automation plays in that process. I like all the points that were made, but I really like the last one you talked about, which is encourage your suppliers and customers to follow your lead. Can you elaborate on that a little for us?
I really like that point as well. I mean, it is a big step for companies to show that they care about the environment, but they can go even further and influence their own ecosystem, call it positive peer pressure. They can influence their suppliers, their customers, their association co-members, anyone in their circle of influence. If they can have an influence on them, that can be huge. And, when it's clear to those companies that you influence that this is really part of your DNA and that you're committed to it, they're going to bend over backwards to follow suit and follow the same cause, especially one like this that equally affects them and their company and their community and their family, et cetera. So in the white paper, we mentioned a comment by, I believe it's the United Nations, that said that sustainability and achieving net zero is a Herculean effort. It's not something that we can continue at the current pace and achieve. It's going to require all governments, all companies, all nations working together to make it happen. And the goal, 2050, net zero, 131 countries have committed to get there, but it's going to take a lot more than we're doing now. So yeah, I think taking the step to be an influence to those around you, those companies that you interact with, you engage with, you do business with, can make a big difference.
Great answer. Michael, last questions for you. So in Bain's ongoing work with companies on automation strategy, do you anticipate that the ESG and intelligent automation issues will intersect more frequently?
Michael, as we've discussed already, I think they already are intersecting to some degree, whether we discuss the issue around disclosure requirements and how automation can be helpful there, to the day-to-day work of achieving your sustainability goals and how it's so critical to enabling the analytics we want to do, to actually achieving many of these goals we set for ourselves. So I don't think it's a question of, is it? I think it's already happening.
Yeah, I would completely agree with you, Michael. And you can see from some of the examples that we've already been able to identify that, this is something that organizations are not just pursuing as a byproduct of their efficiency activities, but also as a desire. And the more that we can encourage that, the more we can encourage the prevalence of a green eye on business efficiency, the better.
Well, I'm so sorry to say this, but we are out of time now. But I really appreciate all of you providing some very interesting thoughts on how we can leverage intelligent automation to drive ESG programs forward and allow our customers to make not only a commercial impact by adopting this, but also make an environmental impact that's going to support their customers and our planet for a long time to come. So I want to thank you all for joining me today. It was a wonderful conversation. I look forward to reading more from you guys as we go forward. I'll leave a link to the white paper in the show notes for our listeners so they can immerse themselves in a whole lot of other great information. So thanks again, everyone, for joining me today.
Well, Michael, on behalf of the whole group, let me just thank you for hosting this. This podcast was a ton of fun, and I really hope in combination with the white paper, it will spark a lot more dialogue on the intersection of intelligent automation and ESG and environmental sustainability in general. So thanks again for your time.
Thanks for tuning in to Transform Now. For more insightful discussions on digital transformation and more, check out our podcast channel where you'll find all of our previous episodes. And to make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show on your favorite podcast player. And if you like what you've heard, please leave us a review. For more information about digital transformation and the future of work, check out blueprism.com to learn how SS&C Blue Prism's digital workforce is enabling enterprise transformation now.